Velveteen Rabbit, or How Toys Become Real by Marjorie Williams. Here was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was warming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. And the model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, was made by the disabled soldiers and should have had broader views, put on airs and pretended that he was connected with government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace, and the only person who was kind to him was the skin horse. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of his hairs and his tails had been pulled out of the string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. That they were only toys, and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and the only playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the skin horse understood all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender, before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things like buzz inside you and a stick out a handle?" "Real isn't how you are made. Real isn't how you're made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have been carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real," said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it. for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive. But the skin horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts forever." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to be real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers. He longed to be real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby, losing your eyes and whiskers was rather. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatsoever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cupboards. She called this tidying up, and the playthings all hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening the boy was going to bed. He couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing the toy cupboard stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out of one ear and put him in the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight. Sometimes he rolled over him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed it too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent, and his talks with the skin horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like burrows and real rabbits lived in. And they had to split. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy that he never noticed his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went till he had rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy hunts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea. The rabbit was left out on the lawn until after dusk, and Nana had come to look for him with a candle because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet, though, with the dew, and quite earthly from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him under the flower bed. And Nana grumbled as she rubbed off with a corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his arms. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself said it. That night, he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes, that had long lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it the next morning when she picked him up and said, I declare, if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression. That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood, and in the long June evenings, the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands above the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, or play at the brigards among the trees. He always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere among the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching ants that ran to and fro between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of a tall bracken near him. They were rabbits, like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams did not show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side of the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Oh," said the furry rabbit, "it's easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I can't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, of course, but he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made out of one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still on the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said, "but the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs." And he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have hind legs. I am sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me like this," said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl around, dance, till the rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear. And then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he explained. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them. And with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I'm real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a very long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back, but they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came out and carried it home. Weeks passed, and the Velveteen Rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He He loved them so hard that he left all the whiskers off and the pink lining to turn his ears gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except for the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day the boy was ill. His face grew flushed and he talked in his sleep, and the little boy was so hot it burned the rabbit when he held close to him. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and the light burned all night, and through it all the Velveteen Rabbit was there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes. And he never stirred, for he was afraid that he might be found out. For he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and knew the little boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day. But he snuggled down patiently, and he looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again. And they would go out to the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up and look at picture books while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day, they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out to the balcony wrapped in a shawl, and the little boy lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out. They talked about it all, while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was disinfected, and all the books and toys the boy played with them must be burnt. Hurrah, thought the little boy, for the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs and sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. She asked, "How about his old bunny?" she asked. "That," said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that one anymore." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with an old picture book and lots of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. It was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised he would come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed. By this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection for him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close to the tropical jungle, in whose shadow he played with a boy on bygone mornings. He thought about those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and the great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him.